Hi, I'm BJ, and this is the Arcane Alienist Podcast. Okay, for today's episode, welcome everybody. Thanks for listening. We will have, I'll start off with a recap of my latest Old School Essentials D&D BX mashup game, and then we'll take some calls. So first of all, here comes the recap. All right, I finally got to play to my Old School Essentials game. We think we've had nearly a month off because of scheduling conflicts and people not being able to show up and just not wanting to advance too much without most of the players. I'll usually play if one person is absent. You know, we'll go on. If there's two or three people gone, we'll just reschedule. But we decided to press on tonight. We had one player out and one player that was kind of late. So I decided to rather than the last time a player couldn't make it and we went full in with the full party, that person lost their character, and they were a good sport about it. They were always kind of the understanding that we can use their character as an NPC, and what happens. But I still kind of felt bad. It's my losing their character while they were gone, and it wasn't a TPK. Their character was the only one that died. So so I just we just had the characters associated with those two players fade into the background, at least initially. But last time they had, finally gone to deal with this issue of orcs raiding on the tradeway, and they encountered, I remember, some bandits, human bandits, who were using orc battle masks, and then additionally with face paint to make themselves look like orcs unless you got up close and really took a good look enough. And then, but they were accompanied by some ghouls, which are actually dead orcs, and ghouls are corpses that are possessed by a demon. So that they're zombie is just a reanimated corpse, but in the mythic world of Erd, a ghoul is it's also a reanimated corpse, but it's specifically animated because it's been possessed by a demon as opposed to just infused with black magic. So and then when you kill the ghoul, the demon goes back to whence it came. And that's kind of what we're shaping up to really demonstrate. They had a brief encounter with a single gnoll, and we got to talk about this a little bit now with ghouls, is that chaos and that kind of dark evil chaos, cosmic chaos, I'm not thinking that it doesn't, or very rarely would it ever manifest in the world of Erd the way it does in D&D, where you just open a gate to the abyss and a demon bops out. That's not how demons come into the world. They have to they're intangible, and they take possession of or attach themselves to something that is in the world. And so that's how you would interfere with extraplanar beings of chaos, because we don't really have this big fleshed out great wheel cosmology that has come to kind of really be standard in D&D. There's really nothing, nobody really knows what's beyond, but we just know that demons are kind of these beings of chaos, and they want to sow destruction and unmake the world, and in any way they can influence the world, or they can tempt or manipulate or corrupt people into doing it for them. That's kind of what they're all about. And so, but yeah, gnolls and ghouls are both examples of where, a gnoll is a beast that has been possessed and mutated into a savage, ravaging humanoid. And then a ghoul is a corpse that's possessed by a demon. Anyway, so that's what they discovered. But because the orc bodies or orc corpses have been used for these ghouls, from the perception of everybody who gets attacked, they're being attacked by orcs, and it's just lightning quick ambush, And the ghouls are completely silent before they attack, per the rules of basic expert D&D. They're undetectable and they're silent until they're just right up on you and attacking you. So, of course, the ghouls rush out of the bushes and kind of melee, and they paralyze anybody that they hit, or most of the people that they hit. And the bandits kind of attack with bows. So it just looks like an orc ambush to anybody who, in the seconds before they die. And then as we've established with Celestina's retainer, Dominique, they kind of blindfold their captives and hand them off to the goblins for slave labor if they take anybody alive. And then the few people who've escaped, it all happens so fast and it's so horrifying that all their perception is a bunch of orcs ambushed us and it was terrible and bloody and terrifying, and I barely got out with my life. So they had to use up some spells and some resources to really deal with these ghouls in the last session. So they go back to the nearby where their dwarven allies have reestablished control of their mine, and got the kobolds to move out peacefully. So they rest up there, get some healing, and recover their mounts. They had left their mounts there because it was just a short walk. And they decide they're going to go back and start from the side of the battle and track, see if they can figure out where these people they fought came from. So they do track them into the woods. And the woods this is kind of a wooded, hilly area, so it is rife with caves, as they've discovered. And they find a cave entrance that the tracks lead up to. And it is sort of decorated with skulls and severed heads around this cave. And there's this sort of row of skulls and severed humanoid heads kind of perched on a ledge above the cave entrance and off to either side of it. So they're kind of scouting around the general area before they go in the cave. And Roderick discovers another cave. So two things are kind of going at once that involve two of the characters. Dolly the dwarf, because of I rolled to kind of let's see who noticed this. And Dolly was the one player character that saw it. So, and just independently, Roderick had kind of wandered off, kind of out of view of this. So he finds this other cave that's sort of back in sort of the undergrowth. And these two things, it worked out perfectly. I couldn't have planned this better if I'd forced him to do it. While Roderick is looking at the cave, I go, well, you get this whiff from the cave that's this smell of rotting flesh that's really familiar from your fight yesterday. And because Roderick's a paladin, I'm like, and your paladin sense starts tingling. You feel the presence of evil and chaos here. But right before we got to that, as he's wandering off, what I rolled for Dolly was one of the heads moves, just really so briefly, just out of the flicker. She sees it out of the corner of her eye. Nobody else sees it. And she's like, did that head just move? What? So she's thinking it's a, crap, now we've got, then Roderick's like, guys, ghouls. So everybody's thinking, okay, well, we've got a severed head moving and we got ghouls in a cave. This is going to be all undead. So they have to deal with the ghouls. They can't mess. They have to stop paying attention to the heads because the ghouls are coming out of the cave. They get some because they were spread out enough that they were able to kind of pepper them with some crossbow and bow fire. But then before the ghouls could close into melee range, and then also they got some good initiative rolls that kept them happening. And then Roderick was able to turn undead, call upon the power of his Saint Cyrus, and turn undead, and the ghouls go retreating back into their cave. And they decide, well, they're going to, instead of chasing the ghouls in the cave, they're going to focus on this main cave entrance that's been lined with skulls and severed heads. So Dolly kind of walks up again and is looking at this head that she swears she saw move. And it's continuing to sit there, so she picks up a rock and she throws it and hits it square in the face, and it screams out in pain. And from her perspective, it rolls back into a hole that's behind the head that had kind of been concealed behind it. So she gets closer and kind of crawls up a little bit and realizes that it's more of an opening into a cavern or a cave. There's a little alcove, and there's been a curtain that's kind of gray stone color that hangs over this window, so you could pop your head up under the curtain, and it looks like your head is resting against the side of the cliff, or with its chin on the ledge. And so maybe that wasn't a head; it was something else. It could be a person. So she lights a powder bomb and throws it in the hole, and everybody hears it blow up, and then there's all silence. So Dolly decides she's going to crawl up and go through the hole. Everybody else goes into the main entrance. So from Dolly's perspective, she crawls into the hole. There's this dead guy there. It's another one of these bandits who's made himself up to look like an orc this time, so he could actually look more like the severed head of an orc and kind of watch out over the entrance. And then also there's a cavern that's been set up with tables and plates and stuff. It's obviously some kind of feast hall or dining area. And there's a couple of large curtains that have closed off and exit out of the cave, out of this cavern into somewhere else. You can't see what's behind it. And then that's on one side, and the other side there's a short passage that she can tell probably goes back to the main cave entrance. So she creeps up and she peeks behind the curtain, and what she sees is it's a common area, and there's some bandits in there who are readying weapons because, a bomb just went off. But there are other people in there. There's like camp followers and even some children. And it's clear that this is a mercenary company who has set up camp in these, a base in this set of caverns, and these are their cooks and their seamsters and their spouses and their children and their, it's a mercenary band, and this is the camp, the train that follows the camp followers. So she creeps back into the dining room and crawls down and crouches behind a table to see what's going to happen. Meanwhile, the rest of the group comes in the main entrance and pretty quickly encounter 4 more bandits in a side room. They take 2 of them out real quick, and the other two's morale breaks and they surrender. So they tie them up and have them captured. But while they're doing this, before they subdue the other 2, there's battle cries and shouts, and so these guys are already getting ready on the far other side of where Dolly is. So they come running out from behind their curtains to see what's happening out there, and they have to stop because Dolly is standing there. I mean, there's a bunch of them, but they can't just run past her now because she's kind of positioned herself in a place where between the tables and the wall of the cave, where they anybody that goes past her, she can get a shot in on them, because of the way BX works. You can't move into the melee and then out of it. You can't just move past people if I'm adjudicating the rules correctly. But even if I wasn't, it made for a cool battle. So anyway, so that was really cool. But now she's in there by herself. But as they're fighting kind of in this alcove, this kind of section in the entryway, once they kind of fight with these guys, Harold, the other fighter, he can look back over his shoulder and see that room with Dolly in there and these guys coming out. So they all kind of shift their focus back that way and start to converge into this dining room. Another small unit of patrol of bandits comes to see from another side passage, and they're kind of surrounded from 3 areas, but they hold their own pretty good. I think a couple people took a couple hit points of damage, just by the luck of the die rolls, and they were using good tactics and good positioning, getting the hang of kind of the order of operations and the way the action economy works in BX. Roderick, once some of the bandits stopped shooting with their bows and closed in, he did take a pretty serious hit from. He got stabbed with a short sword and went down, but fortunately he's got this Hagel, this kobold retainer that has started tagging along behind him. I give people 1 round to save somebody when they drop to 0, and Hagel fished a healing potion out of his pocket and gave it to him. So they spared Roderick, and Roderick was actually able to get back in the fight there for the last round of it. But other than that, they pretty much wiped the floor with these bandits, particularly Dolly. Like she only got hit once for kind of a little bit of damage there at the end, and she's at second level now. So I use the rule where if you're fighting one hit die or less enemies, you get fighters and fighter types, which would include dwarves. They get one attack per level. So she's second level now, so she's got 2 attacks. Harold, the other fighter, has 2 attacks. And so, Harold initially was fighting with a bow, but then he closes in with a pole arm, and then she's got her battle axe. So they're doing pretty good taking people out. But there was one point, and this happens with Dolly. Her player has the luckiest rolls. She first attack is a pretty solid hit and kills that. She's got like 4 bandits surrounding her, kills him. Second attack rolls a crit, and we use a crit rule, house rule. Just it's him, and I said, well, the other 2 guys are now just splattered with blood, and I was going to have those. I wasn't even going to roll morale on those guys. I felt like that's enough to justify them just to be like, we're little peons with 3 hit points. This is not worth tangling with an angry dwarf. And she's just lucky. It's BX. You can't power build a dwarf fighter the way you can in other more modern versions of D. She just has really good die rolls and a pretty good strength score. So, but she's always seems to be a terror on the goblins and bandits and kind of minion kind of characters that all run up to mob around, and then she just mows through them. It's pretty funny. And I think between her doing that and it didn't come into play this time, but our wizard Celestina, her sleep spell, which is pretty, there's no save in BX. It just ends the fight, if it works. I think, the two women in the party are kind of the game changers a lot of times. So that's pretty cool. But the capture, so they've got 2 captured bandits from when they came in the door. 2 of these bandits, one of them actually runs back into the room with the camp followers. His morale breaks. Another one, the last one standing, just a lot of them don't get the chance to surrender. So he drops his sword and is like, "Hey man, I surrender." So they get their captives together along with the non-combatants, and they get the story of why they're there. And these bandits themselves, mercenaries, don't know a whole lot. They're a mercenary band. Their captain manages their contracts and payroll, and so he would be the one who would know what's up. They just know they came here and told to raid along the tradeway and stop travel, and shown how to disguise themselves as orcs to do it. The ghouls, they don't, the ones they're talking to now, really aren't fond of the ghouls. They creep them out. They're stinky. They're gross. They're scary. The ghouls live in this other cave nearby, and they just kind of, when it's time to go out on a raid, somebody has to go up to the door and, kind of say, "Hey, we're ready," and then some ghouls will come out and join them, and they'll travel over to, walk over to the road and start, ambushing and attacking anybody that happens to show up for the day. So they have no idea about what kind of magic or what kind of, if there's some kind of witch or sorcerer or something that's created these ghouls or where they came from. They were already there when this company showed up and started to set up their base in the caves. But they are willing, they're offered the opportunity to help lure the captain out. Their captain has not shown up, and there's some other bandits probably running around deeper in the caves. And they say, well, he may be in his chambers. He may not be here. Sometimes he's not. And he has some way that he comes and goes without any of us knowing when he comes and goes. So he might be here, and he might be hiding or holed up somewhere. He might not even be here, but we'll help you try to draw him out if he is here in exchange for, they probably would have done it for their lives, but Roderick actually offered to pay him a little bit to turn coat on. He's a paladin. He's required to be heroic, but he's not. He's not. The saint that he follows is very much a stern, champion of order and justice, so that he can be a little bit of a he didn't have to be a nice guy to fit the paladin for this particular type of saint, but he can still kind of technically be that lawful good guy, just not lawful nice, and roughing up bad guys and playing to their weaknesses to try to get justice done is kind of a gray area, but it's okay. So that's where we left off. There, I told them that between now and the next session, if through our group chat they want to flesh out their plan a little more and come up with some other ideas, or if they have any other questions that they want to pose that I can answer before we start the next session, and that's where we'll pick up. So I thought it was a really good fun session, and they're discovering a little more about what the heck is going on around here. Also, part of what they were sent to the orcs, the hobgoblin said, well, the orcs have the kobold queen. The bandits have no idea. The orcs, quote unquote, which are these bandits, have no idea. But again, they say, our captain may have more information on that. So that was my latest session of Old School Essentials. And I guess I forgot to mention the player showed up late, and I just had his character and his retainer kind of walking behind him, and was like, "Oh, hey, we finally caught up with you guys. We found your horses and came in, and then we just went on like they'd been there the whole time." So and then at that point, I brought in the missing player's character as well, just to kind of be there, kind of in the back to, so that I knew we wouldn't kind of leave the dungeon before this was over. So next time if they all show up, they're all right there together, without having to kind of do any kind of mental gymnastics or break anyone's verisimilitude, whatever, for the narrative aspect of the game. Okay, now we're going to get into some phone calls in response to some previous discussion and session summaries and other things from the last couple episodes before this one.
I was gonna say I don't necessarily agree with you that it's better to have rules and then you could throw them out. But of course, I'm also coming from a position of knowing how to do exploration and stuff from having played other editions or currently playing other editions. So yeah, sometimes you gotta look at it like, yeah, somebody picking up fifth edition, many people picking up fifth edition have never played D&D before. So, right, they would have no kind of procedure. So that is kind of nice to have that worked out. I'm not a fan of like social skills being roles that you make, but at the same time, having something in place so that can happen is probably a good idea. And I like what you're getting at with the different reputations of where you are. But I will point out that, again, the implied setting of fifth edition, and I know you can play it any way you want, is super high magic. So I don't think your small town's points of light. I think you've got people teleporting all over the place and people flying around on Pegasus and stuff. I mean, that's like the basic uh, 5e structure in my mind. But of course, maybe that's kind of thinking of Forgotten Realms, which is high magic. Of course, I say that with only marginal knowledge of the Forgotten Realms, but in my experience, so I'll revamp that. Forgotten Realms seems to be pretty high magic, and also just the nature of 5e. People know, so many classes having cantrips. There's just magic everywhere. So I don't think it would be that easy to be unknown or that easy to hide yourself if you started really screwing off. But I will say something. I'm reading a book right now, and it's really interesting because they're trying to avoid being seen, and that's exactly what they're doing. They're going to places where they're not known, and these are adventurers who seem to be experienced. We'll say it's all very mysterious right now because I'm still early in the book, but they're particularly going to like small towns and villages to be nobody, so that people will not notice them. So that's the other thing, right? Too much notoriety means it's hard for you to hide. So all that can be super interesting. And I like where you're going with the idea of like kind of keeping track of it. And I don't think it would be that hard to do really if you've got like a little notebook. Unless they're going from town to town to town, it's not going to be that much work. Yeah, I know that Coriolis, my first message was about, has like a reputation which is used, and that's pretty cool. But D&D, the only thing I can think of that's close to that is the old first edition Oriental Adventures had like kind of an honor thing. I haven't looked at that book in a long time, but I know that it was affected by deeds that you did, and also basically by your family, where you were born, all sort of stuff. And that did affect people, like how they treated you, and it had a mechanical effect in the game, as far as I remember. So it wasn't really reputation, but it did have that same kind of feel to it. So that's the only thing I know of. I'm sure there's other, or I would imagine there might be other like supplements or things that have something similar, but just in like base D&D, I don't can't think of any.
Hey, BJ, just listening to you talk about the WebDM podcast that you just listened to about the 5e expansion, which I think is going to be closer to a 6e, but that's neither here nor there. Something you said rang so true to me, and it was it's easier to have a rule and decide to not use it than to not have one and need it. And yeah, man, that's one of my big bugaboos with the OSR and the rules light style games. So I'm getting ready to run Beyond the Wall, which is a great little OSR game, even though I'm sure there are some folks that would say it's not OSR because that's the OSR. But yeah, so I know this is going to be a Fey-based one-shot, and I know some of these fairy are going to be the nasty little kind of Fey that are the drowning kinds. So I'm having to figure out how I'm going to run grappling in this game, and it's taking some time. For me, I feel like that time could be better spent with building out the village or world building. Better to have it and not need it than need it and not have it. Peace out. Hey, BJ, I don't know for certain, but I think I remember the birthright setting for D&D having a like a prestige score, popularity score or whatever. I don't know, and I'm not looking it up before I make this call. So maybe it's in birthright. Anyway, man, great episode. Peace out. Yo, BJ, so in response to Daniel, I talk about how I move my monsters around the way they would move around if they were really in the world. I don't just make them teleport in and out based on what a dice says. I make it, so they're moving around in the world as they would. They don't just sit in one room. That's what I was talking about. I don't know if he made it to the end of my call. That's not really something he does. But yeah, man, my monsters move around. I don't need a table to tell me to do that. Anyway, peace out.
Hey, BJ, Jason here. Just want to say that as far as Joe, great recaps as always. I'm going to point people over here actually to listen to your recap for Tomb of the Savage Kings. After I correct a couple things, mistakes you made about you downplayed Idris Khan's importance in that adventure because obviously, he could have easily walked through that by himself without the help of your piddly characters. But the more important reason I'm calling is reference Joe's call. Oh, before I do that, because I only have less than 30 seconds left on this call, I will say that the reputation thing, yeah, man, I think there's something really interesting here. I hope more people join in. And I'd love for us to come up with, not super codified, but, you know, maybe a PDF page or two of like how to incorporate reputation into games. And this is a fluid enough system. It's kind of system agnostic. But yeah, I'd love to see this in games because I think there's a lot to it. Okay, now let's talk about the Emperor's Throne Room thing. So, to be fair to Joe Richter, he didn't to answer. I think Daniel. I think Daniel's one for Karl. Anyway, I think Daniel called Joe out. Joe didn't say he would leave everybody in the throne room, or he didn't want to use. What Joe said was he didn't like to use water monster tables because he is sight impaired, and he didn't like having to roll the dice, look at the table, look a monster up in the book, all that kind of stuff. So he figured out what monsters would be in his layers or in his dungeons, and he figured out their daily schedule. So depending where the players are, at what time of day, he knew, if the monster would be going to take a crap or if the monster would be walking to the, to the kitchen or if the monster would be on patrol. So he did it that way, so as opposed to wandering monsters. So Joe's monsters aren't static and they're moving, but he has a pre-built schedule effectively in his brain of where the monsters are at any given time. So if it's 2 p.m., Ogre 3 might be in the south corridor, that kind of thing, right? If it's 3 p.m., Ogre 3 is probably in the kitchen. And if it's 4 p.m., Ogre 3 is probably in the throne room because the results of being in the kitchen, right? That kind of thing. And when I say throne room, of course, I mean the room with the thinking seat in it. But anyhow, I think that kind of explains Joe's position a little bit better, which I think is interesting, but I also think it's a lot of work. And personally, I prefer wandering monster tables. I think, but I'm not sight impaired yet, so I understand why Joe's doing it the way he does, and the way he's doing is not wrong at all. I think it's a good way to do it. But for me, I like wandering monsters a little bit better. One might even say Joe's method is maybe a little more realistic. I don't know. I'll throw that volatile comment out there and see how people respond.
Okay, so that was a series of messages from Daniel Norton of the Bandit's Keep, Joe Richter of Hindsightless, and Jason Connerly of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast, all commenting on my comments and one another's call-in comments on a number of topics we've had going on last several weeks. So let me try to unpack all that. Reputation, yeah, we've been talking a little bit about reputation. They all mentioned it somewhere in there. I think Daniel makes a good point that the setting is probably going to depend on, if you talk about a points of light setting, which is that idea that there's little pockets of civilization and then vast distances of hostile, poorly cleared and traveled wilderness where the adventures take place. And just getting from one point to the points of light. A point of light is a point of light in the darkness of a dangerous world. That, yeah, you might just have a local or a very small region where you'd have a reputation and people would know you or know of you, and then they've never heard of you unless you've become some sort of really epic legend in your own time kind of figure over in the next pocket of civilization. They tried to make Forgotten Realms into that with the Spell Plague because Points of Light sort of resurged as a theme they wanted to do for 4th edition. And I think people just didn't like it, along with a lot of stuff they did to the Forgotten Realms to try to cram it into some of the new gaming philosophy they wanted to put in 4th edition. But I think Daniel's right. When you look at Forgotten Realms, I've always said that Forgotten Realms is the comic book universe equivalent for Dungeons and Dragons. And so you play to that aesthetic. And it's high magic and fantastic, and it's just Elminster and Drizzt Warden and those kind of people are basically the Tony Stark and Stephen Strange and Captain America of their action adventure universe there. Which there's no problem with that. I like playing in the Forgotten Realms, and I like the Forgotten Realms. So yeah, I think you would have to look at sort of some of the base assumptions of the setting to know how far your reputation could travel, based on the greatness or the true, I think a truly huge legendary figure would eventually get there, but versus just sort of middling level heroes, they may never be known anywhere more than 15 or 20 miles from home. It just depends on the setting. So I think Daniel has a good point there, and yeah, I think. Jason kind of alluded back to reputation as something that we should keep talking about because there is something, the idea that it might ultimately become a pretty simple house rule or set of principles you can work on that just affects how your any kind of social interaction or reaction adjustments or things like that might come into play depending on your notoriety and how well you're known in a given reason and what you're known for. So I'll keep playing around with it. Maybe I'll come up with something and we can come up with a little PDF that several of us can kind of contribute to and maybe even play test a little bit. And then who knows, maybe it'll wind up on DM's Guild or just, somewhere like that at some point. Our contributions to the community. So we talked about reputation. We talked about wandering monsters. I think whether you've got sort of a schedule you follow, or it's completely random, but random on a table that makes sense for the location. I think either way, you're kind of dealing with the problem of it seems a little more challenging and a little more meaningful if the party wants to pick when and where they choose to infiltrate the dungeon or break into the temple or whatever thing they might be pulling off. If that has some salience, because they put the effort into it, you want to make it rewarding. Maybe not just with success, but at least rewarding in that it's clear that something happened because of when and where we chose to act or not act. but I think, however that works for the DM probably works well. The players probably don't care from what they see on their side of it. Is just we're never exactly sure what's going to happen, and we have the sense that there's motion, there's dynamic motion in the passage of time inside the in the world, and that things aren't just sitting around waiting to react to us when and if we show up in the exact same way they would on Monday versus Tuesday, and winter versus summer, and at midnight versus noon. I think as long as the players are kind of understanding that, and it adds to that sort of challenge of the game. So yeah, I think whatever your procedure is, it's kind of nice to have a procedure, formal or informal, as a DM to breathe that life and that kind of dynamic sense of time and space that moves around in the game. Although that is extra work, so whatever works for you as a DM to allow you to do that, but keep it as simple and as easy for you to use. Because if a tool becomes too difficult or unwieldy, you're just going to set it aside and quit using it, and then you lose out on the kind of the pros of that, the upside of that. On having a rule and not needing it as opposed to needing and not having it, I think it's kind of cool to hear Daniel talk about that, because I know Daniel especially likes old school stuff and kind of a rules light, sticking with things like not a game without crunch, but certainly games where there's a little more room to freeform stuff when you don't have a procedure or a rule if one is not needed. But those of us who have been doing this may have learned we have a procedure whether we know it or not. It's just kind of the way we do it. It's our own method that we may have written down, or we may just kind of act on our gut. But if you watch people act on their instincts often enough, and time and time, you might be able to see a pattern. But yeah, for new DMs, it's real helpful, and that's again, I think I had made a comment particularly about a recent episode of WebDM's Patreon podcast, which isn't open to everybody, where they had talked about, and this isn't the first time that the guys at WebDM have pointed this out, that one of the things that seems to have become more apparent that's missing from 5th edition that would be very helpful are some kind of structure to use for exploration and social interaction. The idea is that there are 3 pillars of play: combat, exploration, and social interaction. And we have got lots of rules about combat. We've got a set of rules about exploration, time, movement, vision. But combat, you kind of get it laid out in one place in the rules, where you can read through it and you understand how combat works. The exploration stuff is scattered and it's a little buried, and there's no procedural layout the way there is with combat. So it's there, but you have to go hunting for it in several locations as the dungeon master if you want to do it. And then social stuff, there's not much. And again, social stuff is probably the stuff you want to be the more free form and natural flowing and improvised and things like that. You don't want to bog down in as many rules. But sometimes there are ways that it's helpful to have things like a way for randomly determining where you would use reputation to help structure the reactions in certain situations of non-player characters and how things might affect people as they try to interact with townsfolk and farmers and legal authorities and people like that. So there is some room for that, but I know, and then we don't have any domain management. I mean, you can figure it out. Again, it's kind of scattered around, but it's not as robust as it once was. But I think it's interesting that some of the people who have become very popular particularly around 5th edition, commentary and contributions through their YouTube channels and their podcasts. Matt Colville, who's managed to, through Kickstarter, build his own design and publishing studio because of the response he got on his first book. And his one and the one that's follow up are about domain management. It's actually some rules that are helpful to use for building a domain, getting staffing your keep or your stronghold with the kind of people you need to make it run, and how to defend it from rivals and engage in conflict between 2 domains and things like that. So because that's just not there in any kind of easy digestible form. And the WebDM guys are have one coming out on. They kind of created a post-apocalyptic kind of a Mad Max meets Dark Sun setting, but buried within the structure of that are going to be rules for survival and wilderness explanation and hex crawls and things like that we don't get a lot of robust rules for in 5th edition. That you don't have to just use their setting to do it. You can drop them into your own setting or to Forgotten Realms or I think it's funny. The Kickstarter was well received, and everybody's excited about the Weird Wastelands, which is this book from the folks at WebDM, and of course a lot of it is like, finally, well, nobody's going to do Dark Sun, we'll do it, and they get that book they get the Kickstarter launched and finished, and they're working hard to get that book out early next year, and then a couple weeks ago, Wizard starts hinting that Dark Sun is now imminent for for us. But speaking of domain management, I think Joe mentioned Birthright, and that's what Birthright in 2nd edition was all about, and it did have those extra rules for managing an entourage, and I think an entourage and an army and domain management, but also reputation being a part of how that works. It's kind of social capital and your standing and things like that. So, which is funny because I think if you follow Matt Colville, he loves that. He loves Birthright, and it's pretty clear. In fact, I think I got him to kind of give me a wink and a nod in a comment section one time when he was first talking about his strongholds and followers rules that he was putting together and what it entailed, and was giving people previews, and I'm like, are you just really creating Birthright? And I got a response from him in the comments section where I can't remember what he said, but it was kind of like, no, that's copyrighted, but there was kind of this quotes, I can't do Birthright, but yeah, I'm doing Birthright. Anyway, so I think that covers the topics that Daniel and Jason and Joe were responding to, and there's some more additional rambling from me that I'm sure we'll get more calls on.
Hey BJ, really enjoying your recaps of Storm King's Thunder. It's one of the books I passed upon. I generally have collected everything else. Maybe I missed the Swords Coast book too, but I'm sure I have it as a PDF that I bought at some point, or I have it part of D&D Beyond, right? But really enjoying the recap. It sounds like a very exciting adventure. I don't know if you ever did Against the Giants. I think it's a homage to Against the Giants, but it sounds totally different, which I think is pretty cool. So there you go. Unless the people behind all these machinations are the same, but I won't say what that is because that'll spoil it for people maybe. So anyway, love it, and it seems very exciting and tough, but it's good to have savvy players, I think.
Hey, Reputation, I guess I missed the subject, or I would have called in. In my BX game, I think I found a cool add-on to Reputation. So I just use a reaction roll, and then as a base to start with, and then as the players did things to help one town or another, or one group of people or another in the domain, then they would get a reputation bonus, like for a good deed or whatever. So, eventually, like, they become allies because, you can't roll something hostile on the reputation roll at 2d6, right? The classic 2d6 reputation roll where, 1 through 5, some fight might break out. 6 through 8, it's like nothing. And then above that, it becomes friendly. So I think that really worked. And you could do that kind of thing, just tracking good deeds in 5e and then add it to a particular role, charisma roll.
Hey Karl, thanks for the comments, everybody. That's Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents. Karl, yeah, I really like Storm King's Thunder. I think it's a well thought out. It's a long adventure path. It takes some commitment, but I thought it was one of the better ones they've put out for 5e so far. And we're on the downhill slope, and I'd probably, not immediately pick it up with a new group, but after a time away from it, I'd probably go back and run it again for a group who was unfamiliar with it. It is kind of an homage to Against the Giants without having the same basic plot. I think that not all the 5e things, but early on they were trying to capture some of the nostalgia for classic D&D, and so they did that. I think the Rage of Dragons, which included Horde of the Dragon Queen and Rise of Tiamat, I think maybe not as clear to a lot of people, but I think it's got some stuff that I think echoes back to the Dragonlance, the War of the Lance. But again, it's not the same story. It's not like you're going, oh, I know exactly what's going to happen next. And then I think Princes of the Apocalypse was definitely an homage to the Temple of Elemental Evil. Similar premise, but again, completely different dungeon, and again, very different. It just echoes of that. Of course, Tomb of Annihilation is a very close homage to the Tomb of Horrors. In fact, Sararak is it's and that's not a spoiler. I don't think, to let people know that it's ultimately the same villain. He's just got a completely new scheme now. But it's a sort of a combination homage to Isle of Dread and Tomb of Horrors, and then Storm King's Thunder to Against the Giants. What are some of the other 5e ones that they've done? I'm trying to think of that are Curse of Strahd. I don't think Curse of Strahd is an homage to Ravenloft. It is a remake of Ravenloft because you are set on. I mean, you have more areas to explore and more fleshed out things to do within the domain of Barovia, but ultimately it's confronting Strahd in a very similar fashion to the way you have before in the original Ravenloft. And then Dungeon of the Mad Mage is of course Undermountain, just a new version of Ruins of Undermountain. Again, some new material and some new stuff, but it's more. I think it's more of a remake than an homage. Of course, it's the exact same location, like Curse of Strahd. It's the exact same location as it was in the previous editions. Versus these earlier ones are really inspired by some stuff that were mostly set in Greyhawk, but now we have some Forgotten Realms versions of them for 5e. So yeah, it's a good one, and I think I made this before. I will get them when they come out, just because I'm a collector. But I purposefully avoid reading the plots of any of these unless I'm actually going to sit down and run them with somebody, on the off chance that someone else is going to run them and I get an opportunity to play. I guess I should also mention Ghosts of Saltmarsh as just a conversion of Saltmarsh with some other filler adventures to kind of fill in the gaps, some that had been published before. And then you've got Tales from the Yawning Portal, which are also just a kind of a hodgepodge of adventures that were really highly regarded from previous editions that have been converted over for 5th edition. So they've got a mix of sort of homages, remakes, and just new versions of the, not even a remake, but just updated to 5th edition of the exact same module. So anyway, thanks for the call, Karl. I appreciate it, and I hope to hear from you again. Oh yeah, and also leave it to Karl after all that discussion of, hey, let's come up with a system and maybe we can put ink to paper and share with people. And I think Karl might have just given us the answer right there about a simple mechanic to track reputation and then incorporate it into whatever version of the game you happen to play. Thanks, Karl.
Hey, BJ, Daniel from Bandit's Keep. You're just starting to do your Pathfinder 2 recap. Very interested in it, as I've never played the system, but we talk about the action economy. That's kind of like how it is in Coriolis, actually. You get 3 points, I guess is how they say it, and then different things cost different amounts of points. So, like, for instance, you could, as you said, move 3 times your speed. You could attack 3 times, although you would take a penalty because those are considered quick shots. Or you could do like 1 normal shot and 1 quick shot, or move and do a normal shot, or you could do a slow shot. And things like, because they do have a little bit of magic in a sense, because they have mystic powers, those usually take like more slots. So yeah, it sounds like it's a very similar system, which I think actually does work really well once you get the hang of it, for sure. I wonder, do you need to, maybe you'll say this, but do you need to use one of your actions to defend yourself? Because in Coriolis, you do. Oh yeah, that was a really good recap. Thanks for doing that of Dungeon Crawl Classics. That seems really, really fun. Their adventures are always so zany and interesting. So, and that was a fun idea to make it a flashback. I'm always nervous to do that because I'm afraid one of the PCs will die. But I guess again, you could figure out some way to make it work, just like you guys did with the "How the heck do we not know him?" So yeah, that was pretty awesome.
Hey Daniel, yeah, I'm playing a wizard and not a fighter. The combat mechanics are not front and center for me. But as I understand it, and I also think that's the way the shield spell works as a cantrip in Pathfinder 2, is that you've kind of got your base armor class, and then if you want to utilize your shield for defense, there's a raised shield as an action, and you have to use that as one of your 3 actions. And I think for a wizard, using the shield spell would be the action, and it mimics the act of raising your shield and putting it into play. Moving forward, I think that is part of the. So basically, you're sacrificing one of your 3 actions to effectively increase your armor class until your next turn. I think that's how it works. Karl can call in and correct me if I'm wrong, or anybody else, Joe, or anybody else that's familiar with Pathfinder 2, or if it comes up next time in play, if I'm paying attention, I'll make a note of it and come back and explain it. And yeah, you mentioned the flashback, my Dungeon Crawl Classics thing, and Jason had mentioned that in his call earlier in the show, and I didn't really respond to his comments, or I had intended to, but yeah, Dungeon Crawl Classics does some real gonzo stuff, and as a result of that, as a result of playing through that, I actually went back this week and watched the 1923 version of The Mummy with Boris Karloff, which I've never watched, and it was kind of a neat. I enjoyed it, and then I something about like there's just the movie would be rated probably PG-13 barely now. It's not, even back then. The critics said this movie isn't really scary. It's a kids movie. I think one critic even said, but it's a great movie. But there's a couple scenes with a little bit of more sexual tension and innuendo between the lead female and both Boris Karloff as Imhotep once kind of the spell falls over, but also kind of the hero of the, and then there's a little more cleavage than you might see in an old movie in a couple of the scenes, and then I realized it's a pre-code Hollywood picture before the studios adopted this sort of code about the good guys are always good and the bad guys are always bad, and there are no anti-heroes or morally ambiguous people, and the bad guys get what's coming to them and the heroes win, and and all other sorts of virtuous things, which included no alcohol, no drugs, and no black people kissing white people. It's stupid stuff. But it just having played Dungeon Crawl Classics, which is a derivative of D&D, which I was involved in the 80s and 90s during the Satanic Panic, inspiring me to go watch a movie that basically they were making in defiance of that code because it had been announced, but it had not been widely adopted yet. There was just an interesting juxtaposition and I don't know if irony is the right word there, but a coincidence or cosmic connection somewhere. Anyway, thanks again, Daniel, for the call earlier and just now these last calls to close out the show. Again, that was Daniel Norton of the Bandit's Keep. He has a podcast and his YouTube channels. Go check those out. And earlier calls from Karl Rodriguez of the GMologist Presents podcast, Daniel Norton, Joe Richter of the Hindsightless podcast, and Jason Carnley of the Nerds RPG Variety Cast. All those podcasts are here on Anchor, but you can usually find them in any of your podcatching apps. So anyway, this has been another lengthy episode, but it had been, I think, a week since I put one out, and the last one, even though it was an hour, it seemed to get, if I just let it sit without, I guess, distracting the audience with new content, it actually got a pretty high number of listens compared to the ones in the several weeks before it. So hopefully you've stuck with me this long, and if you had, I appreciate it. Thank you for listening, and I will be back in the future with some more content. And that's it for this episode of The Arcane Alienist. I want to thank Dave Bone for the cover art that I use for the episodes. Check out ironseer.com. And the music is Come and Get It by Scott Holmes Music. Thank you for listening. Give me a call sometime through the Anchor app or at the Anchor website. And I'll be back in the future with another episode.